Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Seeds and Weeds podcast, brought to you by Small House Farm. Join us as we talk with gardeners, foragers, herbalists, chefs, and community activists to explore the many ways that plants impact our cultures and cuisines, our history, and our future. I'm your host, Bevin, and this is Seeds and Weeds. Howdy, friends. Welcome back to the show. We got a great episode for you today. We're going to be hanging out with Kim Stoddart to talk about her new book, The Climate Change Resilient Vegetable Garden. Kim's a journalist who's written about climate change resiliency for a number of publications, and she's also the editor of Amateur Gardening Magazine. We cover a lot of important topics, too, like building soil, resilient garden design, working with perennial plants, seed saving, and Kim even shares some of her favorite variety recommendations for your gardens. So be sure to stick around. In this interview, of course, it got me thinking about climate change. It's something that we're watching unfold in front of us in real time here. And one of the things I really loved about Kim's book is it approaches the topic in such a hopeful way. I love this idea of finding joy and peace when we're out in our gardens. We're just doing our best to work with what we have wherever we happen to be, right? Even though some things that might happen are unpredictable, in many of the most important ways, Mother Nature is still incredibly reliable, right? Let's think about planting tomatoes. We just got most of our tomatoes in the ground here at Small House, just within this last week. And some people, they have a set date for when they like to get their tomatoes in, somehow related to the frost date usually, right? Like the following weekend after the last frost date, maybe a week after. Some people like to plant on Mother's Day weekend, whatever it might be. With climate change, we've already seen how unpredictable the weather can be. And maybe that weekend that we've always done our planting, it's not the best weekend to plant anymore. A few episodes back, we talked about how the USDA had to update their garden zone map to account for that shift in climate. That unpredictability can make us feel a little uncertain. But remember, Mother Nature is still incredibly reliable. Instead of thinking about certain dates for planting, maybe let's just look to the temperature of the soil. This is always a reliable and successful way to time our planting. Example, we wait to plant our tomatoes until the soil temperature has reached 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we know it's the perfect time to put them out, regardless of the date, right? Mother Nature will let us know when the time is right, and she always will. Now, before we jump into that interview, I just want to give a quick shout out to all the folks that have recently joined our community over on Patreon, including Janae Olson and June Taylor. Welcome and thank you. A big thank you to all of our new and returning patrons. We nearly have 200 members now in our Patreon community, and it's their support that makes the podcast possible. So if you're listening to our show and you're a fan of what we're doing here, please consider supporting our work by joining our Patreon. Members enjoy plenty of benefits too, and you can sign up for as little as $3 a month. You can find the link down in the show notes, over on our website, or at patreon.com/smallhousefarm. This episode is also brought to you in part by our friends at Garden Joy, the garden game that lets you explore your love of plants, seasons, horticulture, and outdoor design. With Garden Joy, designing stunning settings for your flower garden is not only fun, but also relaxing. While you play, you'll learn about plants, seasons, and outdoor garden design. You can find Garden Joy in your app store or visit gardenjoygame.com. Kim Stoddart, a co-author of The Climate Change Garden, writes about climate change resilient gardening for publications such as The Guardian and The Daily Express. She's the editor of Amateur Gardening Magazine and offers online and in-person gardening education through her website, greenrocketcourses.com. Today, Kim's joining us on the show to talk about her new book, The Climate Change Resilient Vegetable Garden. Kim, welcome to the show, my friend. I am really glad that we were able to connect today.
Oh, thank you, Bevin. It's great to be here.
Now, of course, I want to talk to you about your new book, The Climate Change Resilient Vegetable Garden. But it just came out earlier this year from Cool Springs Press. Before we get into that, I would like it if you could share maybe a little bit with our listeners about who you are and your background. This certainly isn't your first time writing about climate change.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've got a background as an entrepreneur running PR companies, and I've always had a love of gardening from a very young age. And when I was running companies, I used to sit there in board meetings, bored actually, wishing that I could become more resilient and turn my love of gardening into a career. So I moved to the beautiful wild west of Wales in the UK 14 years ago, very high up on a homestead, 750 foot above sea level, and just really turned my love of gardening into a career. Been writing for The Guardian since 2013, started writing about gardening for free, which turned into writing about resilience and writing about climate change adaptations. And I've done loads of things since. I edit Amateur Gardening Magazine, which is the world's oldest gardening magazine. We're just about to come up to its 140th anniversary. And I do courses for people like the Royal Horticultural Society in the UK, I was at the big Northwest Flower and Garden Show in Seattle recently. And yeah, I just feel very, very passionately about this topic. So I do all sorts of things around this to help people build resilience.
Oh man, that's amazing. One of the things I really loved about this book is, when we talk about climate change, it's very easy just to slip into this like doom and gloom type of thing. But the message throughout the book it's very positive and full of hope. I just absolutely love that.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, that was something that I realized just from doing a lot of hands-on training and having conversations with people is that actually it's all a bit much at the moment. So we've just had to cope with so many things in the world in recent years. And then we've got climate change. Actually building resilience in yourself as an individual is absolutely key to look after ourselves and to know that there are solutions, and the book is full of solutions, but it's also about giving this hope for the future, and to know that actually being kinder to yourself and working with the natural world can also create a garden that is lower maintenance overall, which makes it easier for yourself so you can have fun in the process and to be able to use the garden for food, but also for well-being, just to switch off from things that you don't want to hear about in the world that are causing stress.
I love how you said the book is full of solutions, because I really felt that way. There's a lot of practical how-to information, all sorts of great stuff. You've written so much on this topic over the years. How were you able to narrow it down to these particular things that you wanted to write about in this book?
Just that they were the key areas that have come out from conversations I've had with people, some of the courses that I run, and also just the writing that I do on the topic. So the most important things, and as you mentioned earlier, they relate to people everywhere, because it's very much about how you can make adaptations, because even if you take the UK, for example, there are many different microclimates throughout the land. So then if you look at obviously America, it's not a one size fits all approach. It's not just about the zone that you live in. It's also about the locality. It's about what sort of pest and disease might there be. What has the weather been like at that time of year? What was it like before last year? So there's a multitude of different factors at play. So the more that you can build this inner resilience to actually be able to think on your feet and to do things like some of those key areas like building soil health, working with natural pest control, that will actually help. That will help no matter where you are. So it's all of this into a book, and it's just really the key areas that people have brought up and that I think it's most important for gardeners to know to actually help them cope with the extreme weather scenarios we're having at the moment. With something like this, you think of climate change and it is incredibly stressful. There is now a term called, it's climate change anxiety because of what we're having to deal with. And when I first started talking about this more than a decade ago, and I'd give examples of extreme weather events, and I had to give a few examples, and you try and convince people, but now there's just stuff happening almost every week as well. So we really are feeling the impact on the ground. But by working with the natural world and employing these techniques, no matter where you live, a lot of them can actually really help a great deal. And they can also make gardening more fun. Gardening so often become about exacting to-do lists and exacting ways of doing things. So the more that you can make gardening your own, in your own locality, with the kind of things that you like to grow, you like to eat, the better that is anyway. It's empowering yourself in order to empower the garden that you work with.
That's fantastic. Let's dig into this book a little bit. In one of the chapters, you write about climate change friendly garden design ideas. So could you maybe share a couple of these design ideas with our listeners?
Absolutely. The first thing I have to say is it's about soil. So soil health. So there's been more awareness over the benefits of a no-till approach to gardening. So make the soil the best it can be. In an organic gardening system, it's, resilience comes from soil up. So not digging the soil, using soil improvers through natural methods such as compost, making your own compost. You can mulch with materials like wood chip, leaf mold. Find what you can locally to weave that in. So perennial plants, working with plants that are longer living helps incredibly because they have greater resilience. They can stay in the ground. And there's all kinds of exciting things that happen below the soil that we don't really know about. We're really at the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding amazing, but plants can form symbiotic relationships below ground. The likes of mycorrhizal fungi, if you encourage it to prosper by letting the soil systems do their thing, it can actually come to the aid of plants and help them find food and water. So there's a lot of resilience to be had, but also if you have layering can be rather good. It can help with the glare of the sun if you've got some shading. So things like natural hedging, looking at perennial plants, trees, shrubs. It can mitigate if there's extreme heat. It can also afford some shelter and protection, but also to make the most of a space by using lots of ground cover plants as well. So on a vegetable garden, to have lots of plants growing in between and try and avoid that bare soil. I use what's called a mixed planting system. I like to call it free planting. It's also known as polyculture in permaculture circles, but it basically enables you to plant lots of different types of crop all together, which works in lots of different ways, and it helps massively with natural pest control, which is one of the biggest challenges with our changing climate.
I gotta say, Kim, I asked you about the garden design and you said, well, first off, we got to talk about the soil. And that is the most important thing. Absolutely, right? A great garden, it doesn't matter how good everything else is. You got to have healthy soil to have a healthy garden.
Absolutely. I had to stop myself then because I can just talk about this because I'm so passionate about it. But yeah, it is. I mean, the soil comes out first and foremost. And to give you an example of this, it's a community climate change garden that I've designed here in the UK near to me. And it's at a business centre. So it was originally a building site. So the soil quality was really poor. And the idea was to create a garden that was really attractive, lots of edibles that the businesses that are based at the centre can pick. But it also was there for people that are accessing the local food bank to come and pick produce, nice fresh produce. So I had to improve the soil incredibly quickly. So the way that I did that was to employ, again, a no-dig, no-till technique of just building that soil resilience. I brought in soil from my gardens where there's loads of mycorrhizal fungi, and I just also mulched the ground. I even used, because I like to improvise, because that's good for building personal resilience. So thinking on your feet and thinking, what can I do? So we had a heat wave early in the year, last year in the UK. So when the plants were put in the ground, there was a risk of them drying out. So we had to look at trying to keep moisture in the ground. So because it was a building site, in the sort of recent history, there was loads of rock and stone. So we used the rock and stone as a mulch around the plants, which actually looked really attractive. It helped to encourage spiders and lots of natural predators like ground beetles. And it also helped to keep the plants protected and to help keep the moisture, the water that we gave them in the soil for longer. So improvising with materials that you can find locally, I would also highly recommend in the garden design because it saves money, it can build resilience, and it feels incredibly good to take something that would otherwise be considered a waste item and to turn it into something fantastic. We just began, it was just through talking with my group of volunteers, and the stone's beautiful. I've actually got a thing about using stone in the garden. Where I live, a lot of my neighbours are farmers, and because I live rurally in West Wales, and so there's a lot of what they call field stones. So they're just stones that come to the surface. So there's an awful lot of that about, and they're often left on the side, please take them away type mentality. So I love them. I use them in lots of different places, and it works really well. So whatever you have in ample supply in your area, it can be useful to see what you can do with that and just turn it into something really, really helpful.
Now, I was particularly interested in the chapter that you did about propagation. Could you kind of unpack this idea for us, the concept of breeding and propagating plants, specifically in the lens of being resilient in the face of a changing climate?
Oh, yes, please. Yeah, absolutely. I'm slightly obsessed with it myself. It's really exciting. And when I do talks, I quite often, in person, I quite often turn up with something like lettuce that I've saved the seed from the following year. And people get so excited to see how much you will get from one plant when you consider how much it costs to buy it. But that's not the most exciting thing. It's, as you said, it's the fact that by saving some of the seed from plants that you have nurtured and grown, by allowing them to complete the natural cycle and to go on and set seed, you can also choose to save seed from plants that have displayed greater resilience, greater flavour, that are better examples of plants that you can then carry forth into the plants that you grow again. So it's, for example, from a climate change perspective, if it's a say, lettuce that has displayed really good resilience against drought, save seed from it. It is such an amazing thing to do. And there's a lot that you can actually save seed from. I mean, you can save seed from more advanced outbreeding varieties, but even that is feasible to do. But things like pea, French bean, lettuce, rocket, radish, tomato, chili, you can just save seed from them. So you've got your own stock of seed for the following year.
The seeds that we save from our garden are actually adapted to our garden, so they're going to perform better for us than any seeds that we would ever buy.
Yeah, it's amazing. And also it's what's really fun as well is if you go to a local seed swap or swap seed with friends and family, people that you know, then there's also a connection to those people and to place, which I think is really rather meaningful. And something like chili, it can cross, but with chili, if you like the heat, it will only get hotter. So it doesn't actually matter as far as I'm concerned. So there's all kinds of exciting things. If we just do things like seed saving, if we let natural systems in to lend a helping hand, but also experiment and find out what works for us and our own individual growing conditions. That's a really, really enjoyable way to garden. And it also helps with the greater extremes of weather that we're unfortunately experiencing.
In the book, you also share a planning and planting guide. So what are some of your favorite and most resilient crops to grow?
There's a few favorites, actually. I think if you're going to grow anything, I think grow herbs, because herbs are such a great way to improve food. They're really good for you. If you take something like parsley, it can be quite tricky to germinate from seed. But if you allow parsley plant to overwinter, it's a biennial, so it will readily flower, set seed, and you can get lots of seedlings for free. So I think I'd go for that, and I'd go for fennel as well, because fennel is, be it bronze fennel or Florence fennel, they're both amazing for wildlife, taste delicious. Florence fennel is, you can actually, if you have a hoop tunnel, you can actually grow it on for a number of years. I've got fennel that's, I think it's about 10 years old, that's growing in one of my hoop tunnels, and it just comes back every year. It attracts ladybirds and lacewing larvae, which help with the aphids in the hoop tunnels, and it's just delicious, and you get it bursting through early in the year. So it's a bit of a taste of spring. So I think definitely those. I also like to grow varieties that work well, and I think it's good to grow varieties that work well for you and whatever the particular challenges might be. So for me, where I live on a homestead, I have a bit of a challenged water supply when we get a period of drought. So what it means is that, I mean, a couple of years ago, the water went down to, it was 10 gallons a day that was coming in, which isn't enough for the home, let alone for the garden. So basically the plants outside just had to make do. So even those in the hoop tunnels weren't watered for a number of weeks. And it's amazing how through working with the natural systems, everything really flourished. The only thing that didn't really work was some of the cucumber varieties that I was growing. But I did things like I rooted tomatoes in the ground, in the soil, so they could get water from more than one place. And lots of clever little tricks that helped to keep water in the soil and protect the soil, like mulching, that made it last for longer. So going back to varieties, I would also recommend crystal lemon cucumber, because that is a variety of cucumber that is incredibly unfussy. It will grow even when there isn't a lot of water, and you don't have to be exacting about the watering that you give it. I also like tomatillo. Tomatillo is most commonly associated with Mexican salsa, but actually it's quite versatile in the kitchen. You can do all sorts of exciting things with it. If you roast it, you can add it to dishes. And again, it's very, very resilient. It grows well outside where I am. So I definitely recommend that. And I'd also look at the pick and come again varieties of both brassica and lettuce rather than ball-headed varieties, because they actually, you get a lot more for your picking. So per plant, you can harvest a lot more, and it's a lot easier to work with. And it's quite a lot of the brassica, like the Swiss chard and the purple sprouting broccoli, can actually also be grown on for a number of years. So that's also a beneficial, worthwhile thing to do, because it saves work for you as the gardener.
So a lot of that, what I feel I'm picking up from what you're saying is learning to be a little more relaxed and flexible with the things that happen in the garden and finding ways to work with what Mother Nature's already doing out there.
And it's interesting, you feel a bit naughty at first by sometimes doing some of these things. When I was gardening for free for The Guardian a good 10 years ago, I had to take the traditional gardening rule book and very politely put it to one side just to figure out how I was going to do this. this. I mean, you can grow in a really wild capacity. For example, tomatoes trailing all over the polytunnels on the ground. I haven't staked them, and that's how I discovered they could root in the ground. And it's really, really fascinating how different plants can be propagated in different ways. Different things can come back that you didn't think that they necessarily would. So it's good to just give the natural world a bit more space, to control it a little bit less or a lot less, depending on how you feel, and then just see what comes forth. It's amazing. It's fascinating to watch. My polytunnels, my hoop tunnels, are full of wildlife, natural predators that have moved in over the years. And for me, gardening with a space that is so full of the natural world is also, it's good for natural pest control, but it's such an enjoyable, mesmerizing space in which to be. If I'm editing the magazine, if I've had a busy day full of meetings, just half an hour outside is all it takes just to watch the wildlife, and you can feel your head clearing. It's amazing.
This has been fantastic. Kim, what are the links that folks are going to need to connect with you online and to order their copy of your new book?
Thank you. It's been great to be here. Well, I think if I recommend greenrocketcourses.com, that has lots of information about me. And Amateur Gardening Magazine is amateurgardeningmagazine.com. And then the Climate Change Resilient Vegetable Garden is widely available.
Sounds great. I'm going to put all those links down in the show notes so folks can click on through. Kim, thanks again for joining us on the show today. That was just absolutely wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Bevin.
Believe it or not, looks like we're at the end of another show. Big thanks to Kim Stoddart for being our guest today, and to all of you for tuning in. Remember, if you enjoy the podcast, you can always show your support by joining our Patreon community. You can find that link and much more at seedsandweedspodcast.com. This episode was edited and produced by all of us here at Small House Farm, and the music we're enjoying right now is In Your Eyes by William King. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Bevin Cohen, and we'll see you next time.